And like I look down and sure enough, these floating, and I mean, there's thousands of them. And then we see like cases
That's
of Coors Light is like coming down the river. So we start just, we're freshmen in college. We're just taking our nets and we're scooping up this beer and we're bringing it over to the shore. And I don't know, by the end of like a good half hour's worth of this flow of beer, we've got it stacked up on shore. And a truck had gone off the road, a beer
oh
truck on the canyon way up ahead of us. It got in an accident into the river and spewed all this beer. And sure enough, word got into town and like the whole town was there on the Gallatin just scooping up free Coors Light. So best day of fishing I've ever had. Hands
no.
down.
At first, I'm thinking like, okay, was someone just like float in the river? Is that a river you can float?
Yeah, yeah. So it happens when you dump a raft with a full cooler and you lose the cooler, but this was like thousands of cans of beer.
Yeah, it makes
Amazing.
sense if it was a truck. No, I've most of my fishing is off the dock, so I have not had a similar experience of cans just flying at me. I can't imagine.
It's so good. So good. Especially a broke college student, like mind blown. Oh man.
I would make the day. Well, welcome everybody to SolidWorks Live Design. We're going to get started here in a few minutes. So welcome to the show. Looks like the chat is already warming up. So welcome everybody. We've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about with rendering today, specifically that DTV shredder that you've seen so much of recently. A lot more knowledge to share with all of you. So these days, Mike, you don't live in Montana anymore. Where do you fish now?
So Minnesota, and I moved back here. My brother moved back here. He was in Idaho and part of Colorado for a while too. Both avid fly fishermen. Moved back to Minnesota, where I'm originally from. Kind of gave up, but we found the southern area of the state is called the Driftless region, which is where they didn't have any glacier movements back in the glaciatic age or whatever. So it's very limestone bluffy, and it has all these limestone fed creeks that are just pure, crystal clear water, high trout population. So you get it's a totally different state. It's not the Minnesota I think a lot of people think of. It's gorgeous and it's just excellent fly fishing. So yeah, we head down south and we get a long 4-day weekend once a year together, and we fish throughout the year. But that's coming up this weekend. That's why we're talking about fly fishing and fishing. Super jazzed.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Most of my fishing is off the dock, and we hit up a couple lakes up here in Washington State. So that's always fun to take the kids out, teach them how to fish, how to bait hooks. I mean, for me, we can talk a little bit about the flies that you use, but for me, it's like, I remember when I was growing up learning how to fish, power bait was what I used.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I think that stuff was just new enough where the fish would just go after it. It was like I was the young kid on the dock reeling in all these fish. No one else is like catching anything, using worms or whatever. And it was like the power bait was this magic new material that like just brought all the fish in. I had
Does it have
way too many
a
fish
scent
to eat.
embedded to it too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm trying to remember. Gosh, I don't remember what scent I used, but there was a reliable one. And reliable colors too. There was the yellow power bait and orange were the really good ones.
Interesting. Yeah. It's funny how color plays into it, where fish are supposedly, I know trout are inherently colorblind, but yet they pick up on a certain UV reflection. So even though they can't see color, it's still super important to offer something of color, and that color can change. Yeah. Power bait.
Power bait. It's
I'll
great
have to bring some down this weekend. Tell the guys, what are you throwing on? What fly are you using? I'm not. Power bait. I'll report back. I slayed it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and get this show going.
All right.
So welcome everybody to SolidWorks Live Design. I'm your host today, Michael Steves, out of Seattle, Washington, Pacific Northwest. Looks like Eric's already here representing the Pacific Northwest as well. So thanks for being here, Eric. Looks like there's a number of other of you that have already engaged in the chat. So this is episode 7 of SOLIDWORKS Live Design. Today we're going to be talking with Mike Sandy, rendering expert, specifically focusing on SOLIDWORKS Visualize Professional. So we're going to cover a number of tips and tricks of the story that Mike has to tell using the DTV shredder. And this is a product that I've featured with simulation, doing some FEA analysis, especially with like rubber components, because there's this really cool rubber bushing that's inside that DTV shredder. So to learn more about that story and what we've done with shredder, you can go to shredder.solidworks.com, and there is a link in the description here of the video so that you can go learn more about the shredder story, as well as how we're using SOLIDWORKS technology to make those design improvements and figure out not only how we're getting this thing designed from ideas, but all the way down to manufacturing and doing some really cool machining with some of the capabilities of the 3D Experience Works portfolio. So part of that is we're taking a look at photorealistic rendering with SOLIDWORKS Visualize. So if you take a look at that shredder.solidworks.com website, you'll see this really cool image of the shredder out on the sand flats. And this was produced by none other than Mike Sandy. So we're fortunate to have Mike here today with us to kind of explore and go through the technical end of how we created that image. And if we have time, maybe get into a little bit of the animation capabilities of SOLIDWORKS Visualize. So Mike, welcome to the show. It's great to have you back. I think we've been doing a couple of these now, building in this session. So I'm really looking forward to getting this photorealistic rendering. So I kind of, we're talking about SOLIDWORKS, and this kind of all comes from SOLIDWORKS. Should we get started there on where this CAD model is coming from and how we're going to leverage it?
Yeah, so a little on that backstory. This last year, it was falling into the spring. There's a team of us from SOLIDWORKS that we basically have some customers we get to reuse their data. These guys, awesome DTV motor company, they create the shredder. So the DTV stands for dual track vehicle. And we've had this data set around a little bit, but really haven't had a chance to dive into it. So there are 5 of us from SOLIDWORKS dove in, really took it apart, and just looked at like how did they design this thing and how did they use our tools. And we actually really put it to test against the 3D Experience platform. We wanted to see on the SOLIDWORKS connected version how well we could remotely collaborate on the design and build this story. So that's what this website's all about. I'm going to plug it here because we put a lot of time and effort into this project. It's really fun. But you can also check out a lot of the renderings that I spent a good amount of my time getting done, because really this is a marketing piece, and Visualize Professional, one of the best tools out there, if not the best. It's my favorite for creating photorealistic renderings to really bring CAD to life. We didn't have a shredder to take pictures of. I don't have a salt flats close by. I'm in Minnesota. So yeah, if you click through here, even this first video shows an animation done in the shredder, and then there's some additional renderings as well as we go through. So just really helping elevate the story. Obviously watch the videos, because this goes into some of the additional stuff that the 3D Experience offers from the project management design side. But today we'll be working on getting to hopefully this image here, kind of walk through the experience I had to get something that I'm pretty proud of, because I think it turned out nice. I think it's one of my better renderings for sure.
All right. Well, before you get into that, I just got to say to our audience, if you have any questions, put them in the chat as we're going through with SOLIDWORKS Visualize. And even on the shredder too, we might, even though we didn't come up with the original design of the shredder, we kind of found out some really cool things that are going on inside. So please engage with us in the chat. And for those of you that are new to SOLIDWORKS Live Design, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You can even hit that notification bell to get notified when we go live on our next episodes. So real quickly, we've got some really cool stuff with some more simulation next week with Exploring 3D Experience Works. And then we'll be back with some 2D drawing capabilities with DraftSight. So we're mixing it up a little bit. But I guess with that said, let's get into some photorealistic rendering, Mike.
Awesome. So I'm going to start right in Visualize, and I figured we would start right in the import process. So everyone's aware, the data set that I'm working with is basically what we got from Shredder. So this is, in terms of how an engineer and maybe a marketer or someone working on the rendering might be the same person. You're going to leverage that CAD data a lot of times as is. I did a live design last year, and I spent some time up front in SolidWorks kind of prepping the model. But I also want to show that you can kind of skip that altogether and just go right into Visualize, and then we can do a lot with it here. So file open in Visualize and grabbing the top level assembly of the DTV shredder gets me to the import settings. And this is important, I think, to talk about because more often than not, when I help out customers who are running into weird behavior, it's because they haven't just gone through and played around with some of these settings. And this can be really determined by how it's structured in CAD, maybe how the appearances are applied, maybe no appearances are applied in CAD on the SolidWorks side of things. So how you say we want to bring it in is going to affect the behavior. Now, as a user, by default, you should be aware the tooltips here are really helpful. So hovering over and just reading, it'll explain, do a good job on like what's actually intended to go on here. I almost always, I think I'd say 99.9% of the time, unless I do work in like kind of set it up in SolidWorks Desktop, SolidWorks CAD, start with automatic because it does a great job. The guys developing this have figured out, what is the best rule of like the assembly hierarchy, the assembly tree, and how appearances are applied in CAD and how it might come in. So as you're working with it, start here. It's a great place. But if you bring it in and all of a sudden you realize like, oh man, everything is grouped as one big part. That's not how I want it. Come back and take a look at some of the other options. Specifically like layer appearance is the one I go to, and appearance layer. And again, you can read the tooltips, but like the layer appearance will prioritize the assembly structure and then group by the appearance, which is generally what the automatic kind of defaults to. And then the other way is appearance layer, where it says, let's group all similar appearances as one part. And then we'll try to break that down and do sub parts, or I guess within the groups of the assembly structure.
Yeah.
So big takeaway here. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Some good automation going on here. And when I think, as a SolidWorks user, when I hear layer, that's kind of like the assembly structure. Is that right?
Yeah. That'd be the assembly structure in terms of, yeah.
And I think some of this more will make sense once we start seeing where these kind of layers and groupings happen, because you're going to get into some really cool tricks of identifying all the components of a common appearance.
Right.
And this influences this, right?
Yep. The other option here to be aware of is like the monitor file. So at this point when we were creating these images for our marketing pieces, we weren't rebuilding the shredder or redesigning it. We were just walking through what the engineers had done at DTV Motor Corporation to get to there. So I wasn't worried about seeing any major changes, so I disable this. But what I recommend is turning this on. This just means it looks at that assembly or part file, and if there is a change in the save date, it'll let you know. It flags the user in Visualize and says, hey, this has been updated. Do you want to import the new file set? You can say yes, brings in that change to it and lets you continue to work. I'm going to start to break things apart, actually manipulate some of them or extract some of the mesh. And I don't need this. So there's no point to monitor the file, whatever, but just be aware this option is here. You've got it. A few others on the left side, appearances, you want to bring those in if you've got appearances applied in desktop, which, like you apply like a 1060 or, an anodized whatever steel inside of there. You might as well bring those in if there's some rhyme and reason to it. So I leave that checked. Geometry obviously checked. And then anything else, check or uncheck. But I usually leave these all unchecked as I'm going to reapply. I'll apply decals, change the scenes, and so on.
Great. Well, that's getting to work. We have Kunal in the chat letting us know that he has an entry-level graphics card, Intel i5 10th gen. If he sets the image resolution to 2500 by 1080p, he's saying that machine takes around 4 to 6 hours to render. Is it possible to make it faster? So kind of improve the output image quality. And I know you're going to be getting into some of that output, and we can talk about hardware as we a little later on. But I think keep that in mind as we get ready to render this out.
Yeah, I can actually talk about that right away. I mean, obviously with any rendering technology, the more horsepower you can throw at it, the better it's going to be. And with the new like RTX, the new Ampere architecture from Nvidia, we've seen like 3x gains over the Pascal cards of the past. So we work with these guys. Our development team works with both Nvidia and AMD when they're developing this. Visualize sits on top of iRay, which is an Nvidia technology. So there's some optimization there, but we still work awesome with AMD. So with that said, when you get into this, I think the biggest enhancement we saw in the last couple of years, this was like 2019, I want to say, was this denoiser option. You'll see it in the live preview, and I'll turn it off real quick. I'll just show you. So as I zoom in, you see how it's starting to pixelate. And I'm working with a little bit of I'm on a Maxwell card, but it's a pretty high GRAM on side of here. So I've got 24 gigs, pretty fast processor, but it's old. So you see it's pretty quick here. Actually, I'm gonna go over and change over to my accurate rendering. This toolbar up top, you have a few options. Preview, we'll use that. I use this a lot, especially setting it up or moving parts around. The fast option is gonna not do a full ray tracing. It actually won't calculate things like how light refracts into glasses or semi-opaque materials. And then you got your accurate. This is the full-blown legit, like, yeah, this is what we want, what I usually do my final renders on. So a little more emphasis on the need for a card. So watch this. I'm going to zoom in. You see it takes a second to kind of pixelate. Well, when I enable this denoiser, what that does is it uses a technology from Nvidia. I'm just trying to get some noise, and it'll actually interpolate or extrapolate the surrounding image, and then it just snaps, and it no longer is processing through the actual light tracing. It just figures out what it should look like. I can't explain it much more than that because I honestly don't know, but it's really cool.
Oh, this is really probably good high level overview. The first time I saw that denoiser, like my mind was blown. It's like, wait, and you see it like at past 10, that's when like it snaps on, like it renders just enough to then apply some AI, and it just snaps that interpolation on there. It's awesome.
So that's when you go. Yeah, huge. And it's in the final output. So in the output tools, you'll see the enable denoiser. What I recommend doing is, as Steve's was just saying, Michael was just saying, once that pass count reaches 10, it has enough to calculate. So at 10 passes, this thing looks really good. I would do a sample of just saying, all right, my pass count 10 and enable that denoiser. You might want to go to 15. That's fine. And then give that a whirl. See what your final output looks like. That should cut your rendering time dramatically down.
Yeah, great tip.
All right, so we've got this in here. I'm going to go over, generally when I bring in a new model, I'm not too worried about the actual, what the final rendering is going to look like at this point. I'm really in a step of like pre-processing this. Michael, you and I talked about pre-processing for Sim not too long ago on a live design.
Yep.
There's a lot here too. And really what we're looking for is areas of detail that like the human eye will catch that you don't even think about. And I think we can all think about this in our given day. Like as we look around, you look around your office, your home, wherever you're at, the first thing you'll notice is nothing has a sharp edge. It's impossible, right? You can't truly machine a perfectly sharp edge. The sharpest knife you have at a microscopic scale still has a bit of a bevel. And that's like a first giveaway whenever I look at a rendered image, even if it's super pro, is if you see those really, really sharp edges. So when I brought this in, we'll get up on this tread. That was like really, really extreme to me was the tread to it.
Yeah, really sharp edges. That's from CAD for sure.
So one of my first tips in here, and the first thing I tackle on this one, is how do we clean that up? And you could go back to the CAD model, add that in there. I've done that in the past. The Viz standard version, you probably want to go through and you can add a configuration there. But Viz Professional offers this really, really awesome tool. So what I'm going to do is, you guys will notice I'll be working between different selection tools. So again, on the top toolbar, it can be a little funny because they're similar colors. We've got my rendering mode. So I'll be toggling between like the preview, fast, and accurate. And then there's the selection set. So if you're not aware of these, this is the whole entire model. So the top level assembly, we've got the part, we've got the group. And again, this goes back to how it's imported, and then the appearance. I almost always work with the part and appearance. And this last 2021 release has a really handy option where if you're working in part selection mode, which I just enabled, and we'll give that a sec. It's pretty big. It's a pretty big assembly, so you'll see a little bit of lagginess as I process. But I can now double click, which I just did, even though I'm in part selection mode, and the new double click gets right into the appearances. So it's a fast way to work between the two. Single click grabs the part, double click grabs the appearance of that part.
Hey, real quick, while you're on the appearance, we have South TTM asking, you see some renderings where the assembly is a dull white, almost ceramic looking. Is there a quick way to do this? And since you're on appearance, I thought that was good timing of changing the appearance to, maybe globally to everything. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so the PhotoView 360, and this was actually something built into the iRay technology that we reside on, it gives what they call an ambient occlusion or global illumination. Visualize up to 2021 let you just do a output where you would say, I'm going to change the render layer or the render output, and you could just select those. It would just then render out that shading, that white shading, right? I think that we're referring to. I don't think I have an example close at hand, but
I think back to the designer. His name escapes me. Shame on me. But we saw like renderings of the Batmobile and Guardians of the Galaxy ships, like where that model was sort of like white almost, right, ceramic looking, and it had a lot of ambient occlusion in there.
Yep.
So I think that's what Brad's asking about there.
Yeah, so what they did is in 2021, they moved that into a camera filter. So now you'll see there's this enable tune option. And this enable tune option, and I'll enable it. This takes a second to process, especially with bigger assemblies, because right now in the back end, it's looking for all of the edges of this model. And I don't know how long it'll take, but there we go. So the enable tune, right away, the default goes to this nice black edge. Let me zoom out a little bit. This is a super cool.
Very
I think one of my favorite enhancements of 2021 was this guy here, but they've moved that ambient occlusion into this bucket. So what I can do is now see this in real time and get this more of that industrial design type feel. In fact,
definitely
had a great conversation with Jason Poole about this. He helped me do a presentation over at the Nvidia GTC conference virtually. And Jason loves to use Visualize early in his design workflow process when working with his customers. What a better way to do it, right? When we don't want to get scope creep right at the beginning of a project, we can start to use this, which it gives more of that industrial kind of sketchy feel to it.
That's definitely the one. That's awesome. Yeah, I love those renderings. That's so cool.
So you've got this. You can actually come through and toggle the edge color. I think this is really slick. I like the kind of that blue ink outline to it. This is something you couldn't do with the ambient occlusion output. You'd have to do this in like a Photoshop or something, and it's pretty painstaking. But changing this edge color, you can actually change that ambient occlusion style, the shading colors. A lot of really great options inside of this tune filter, which is part of the cameras tab. So check that out for sure.
Great.
Hopefully,
so this really makes
that answers this question.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so that with that rendering mode, it's like, okay, the sharp edges are definitely there for early phases. Totally makes sense. Let's go back to that realism option, right? We want to break some of these edges off. Let's do some of that model prep.
So this is probably one of my most hidden gem, I think, inside of Visualize, in my opinion, is when you select on the part here. And for those who might be a little bit newer to Visualize, let me just give a quick insight here. So right now I'm working on side of the models. This is all the geometry we brought in. This is how we've grouped it with that import setting. So everything is a group, and then in the group has that part. Depending on how you import it, this might change. Don't worry too much about it. Like I said, most time with the automatic, you get this great behavior. So right now, I'm going to select the tread on this side here, and you can turn it on and off. You can change the opacity. Maybe you want to look inside of a component, like you got a black box. You want to bust that out. There's some cool options, but advanced. On the advanced tab, you'll see this corner radius, and I'm going to give this like a 2. All right. So just like that, applying a corner radius to the part automatically breaks that edge of the mesh and builds it into without affecting the CAD model at all. It's a super fast way to start to just come through and find areas where, it's just not quite real. Like a fastener, if you're using Toolbox inside of SolidWorks, the fasteners are going to come in, look pretty good, but you're going to have this edge to it. So you can click on it. We'll do a break of, again, we'll try 2. And it just not as dramatic because we don't have an appearance to set to it, but just breaks that edge enough where the eye isn't gonna. That's not real. That doesn't look right, and that's really what we want to do. In fact, now it's less of an object.
Awesome. Yeah, Dallas just made a comment that this is going to be one of those videos that he bookmarks to come back to reference later. Definitely, this is the kind of tips that I didn't even know we could, break that corner. Normally, I would just go back into SolidWorks, update the model, apply those refining touches there.
Yep.
This just makes it so easy.
Now there is a nuance with it though, and I want to point this out because I ran into it with the shredder, exactly in this workflow, and that's what this live design is all about, is telling this story, right? So I got in here, I saw those sharp edges. All right, let's break them right away. And then the next thing I did, I said, well, I don't like this appearance. This doesn't look like a tread to me. And if go online, Google search tank treads and look at images and use those as inspiration. And what I saw right away is a lot of them had a texture, especially if they've been used, right? It's going to get some wear on there, and you can think of what that wear might look like. So for me, again, I'll use the handy double click on here. The import from CAD brought in a glossy rubber plastic. This probably could be pretty good. We could, maybe darken it up a little bit more black on this. Play with these. This is the nice thing with the real-time rendering option, is you can see what like a highlight color might do to it. Really, where you're going to get light reflection, what color comes through there. But what I wanted to do is add a texture. Visualize comes with a basic library. These are all just 2D images. They're going to be found in the installation directory of Visualize in the Visualize content. Play around with these. If you don't have one you like, this easy Google search. You can look at, you just look at for like displacement maps, search sand displacement map, and you're going to get something grayscale or this like purple and kind of purple pinkish type look. These will actually tell the rendering software how to separate that out. So for this one, looking at like a leather normal, I wanted to try this. All right. So apply that in the bump map. So we're just going to give it bumps. That's a lot of bump. You can tweak these. It comes in relative to however big that size that image is. It's going to try to map it there. Change the scaling. So I'm just going to scale this thing down a little bit, and then if you look at it, that looks to me much more like what you would see, right? I think.
Yep.
But
I agree.
But here's the kicker. These displacement maps no longer allow for you to use that edge rounding. So it's kind of a trade-off. If you really wanted both of best worlds, you'd have to go into CAD at this point. And I didn't know this. I figured this out when I came in here. So like this enable texture button, if you disable that, you get that nice round edge. Enable it, you lose it, but you get this nice texture.
Yeah.
So here's something cool you can do. And Michael, I was showing you this. I think something I ran into on accident that works well, and I want to share with you guys, is if you're not sure and you kind of want to do a little side-by-side example, you can copy and paste in geometry in here really easily. We're not working with like BREP, geometry like we are in SolidWorks. Super lightweight. This is all mesh. Just copy, paste it, delete it. You can have fun with it. So I clicked on this, Control C, Control V, And now I've got a second instance of this tread. Here's an example where if your performance is a little off, you're rendering in real time as I pulled that out. Switch over to your rasterized version, which is this guy, and you can move stuff real fast in here. Come back. So now I've got two treads. They both have that rounded option. Let's go to this one.
Mike, on that rounded option there, we have a question from here. Can you apply that corner radius globally? Like to everything at once?
Not to my knowledge, no. I think the calculation would be pretty rough on it. So you do it to the point of that. Like it really, you don't necessarily need to either. And that radius is going to change depending on the size of the geometry.
Sure.
Like you may want to do a 2 mil tread here and a 0.5 mil on a fastener or a smaller thing. So really what you're looking for is like the larger objects that your eye sees that. Or if you're going to be doing like a up close shot or a animation of a bolt coming out, make sure to round those off. You don't need to do everything. If you just to answer that question, yeah.
Good. So you can do this comparison, which is going to be interesting to see which one do you prefer.
Oh, so here's something too. Is right now you'll notice that as I enabled this texture, I'll double click again to get to the appearance. It's doing it for both. So what I want to do is just create another instance of it. So I'm going to grab that appearance, copy and paste, visualize. We'll park this at the very bottom of all of the stuff that was imported. There's a big tree here, so we'll give this a second.
Yeah, so that's a good thing to remember is that corner break option was, that fillet radius is associated to the appearance, right? So I guess you could go through based on each appearance. That's where you would apply that corner radius setting if you have multiple components that you want to break.
It's in the part geometry itself, but when you do any type of displacement mapping to the mesh, it doesn't recognize that. Like, I think it's just the order of operations, how it's calculated.
Yep.
Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to ask the development team guys on why. And we'll let them know too, make sure they get it fixed. But I think it's worth noting that it's there. So here we're going to go in and let's just do the comparison. I've created its own instance of the texture. So that way I'm not changing for both. So again, copy C, copy V, drag that new appearance over here. It's its own standalone. We'll enable it. And then I can kind of zoom in. Lighting can be a little better over here. It's dark black. And personally, I think having that rounded edge looks a lot better.
It does.
Yeah. So we'll just kill it. Oh, that's my appearance part. Select the part, delete it. And we'll work with that.
Yeah, that was a nice, easy way to do that comparison. I don't know. We'll see what the chat says. You can see if they have any input on which one is their favorite to help drive this before we wrap up here. So
now, the other way too is creating a configuration, and you could toggle between the two.
There you go.
I personally really like being able to just make a copy. I was doing this with I was working with Jason again. I'm going to name drop Jason Poole because he's an awesome guy, and I've had a chance to work with him recently. But we were doing one of his tires. We were looking at that and just getting like the mapping done right. It was in his model. We couldn't see it. So Jason and I pulled it out, made it a separate instance as like our little sandbox. We're able to figure out how to translate the tire tread mapping. All right, got it figured out. Replicated that appearance back on all his 4 tires, and then we move forward. So even if it's something's tucked in, you can't see it. Control C, Control V. You got a little sandbox to play with.
Great. So getting into some of these other parts, I mean, I see it like some of these have these kind of flat plastic view that we may want to refine, add some more realistic materials to. Now, as we go, keep going through this workflow here to get us that rendered image, Mike.
All right. A lot of times you might luck out. I think the shredder was great. I brought it in, and there wasn't a ton of work in terms of reapplying a bunch of materials. It might not be the case, but spend a little time and just kind of go through and take inventory of what materials did come through. So like, for instance, I caught this, these wheels obviously need some sort of rubber to it. Come into the library, we can say, either plastic or there actually is some dense rubbers. The SOLIDWORKS materials come through. You can play with those. So just drag and drop. You like it, it looks all right. But if you do see something, from SOLIDWORKS, great. Like this kind of glossy rubber to me, I think looks good. So favorite hotkey you're going to learn today that I hope you use is if you hold down shift left click and then shift right click is your copy paste. So this is a way to just grab in an appearance you might like. And if you want to reapply that, just copy paste. So I'm going to come in here, right click, and we can start to just paint, right? Just fly through and really start to apply that appearance. What's nice too is we're actually grabbing that appearance, and I can color 44 is what it is, and clicking on it will show me all the locations of where that's being used. So this is all these appearances, even though they're individual parts, and I can modify individually as is. This is that automatic import option I used, or I can come back and once they're painted across, we can start to modify these, individual or as a globally. So I can tweak maybe a little more gray in there, maybe a little roughness. This is might be too shiny for my needs. I think that's starting to look a lot better. So things like fasteners, this is really cool. You'll see how this fastener, obviously, we wouldn't have just a dull gray. Double click on this. This was done in SOLIDWORKS. All the fasteners were the same color, this white PW. If I zoom out, we start to see we've got a bunch of grouped fasteners there. Instead of dragging and dropping or shift left, shift right, painting that through, I'm just going to grab that and just change it. Let's change this to a metal. That's going to give nice reflectivity to it. We'll give a little more gray, and you'll see this white PW is now this nice metal, and we'll give it a different name so I know what I'm doing. Let's just call it fasteners.
Yeah, I think that's a great, easy way. You have a lot of the same component, but remember, Visualize is organizing some of this differently where we can, things are already grouped by appearance almost. It's kind of one way to think about it. And so you can change that appearance and it changes everywhere where it's used. It's awesome.
So here's another cool trick with that too, is that didn't get all the fasteners. You'll see there's another white PW here that has a bunch more. So there was a different grouping that happened. No big deal. What you can actually come in is grab that fasteners that I just renamed. We're going to edit, and we can copy this here, copy appearance. It's a little bit of a lag. And then what I'm going to do is assign the appearance to all of these fasteners. Edit, give it a sec, and assign the appearance fasteners to that one. And now all those other ones. So then if you do have some weird groupings like I do, no big deal. You see that a bunch more fasteners. We're just going to start to just assign them. So that way I'm not digging around trying to find them.
Yeah, and that could be from the grouping earlier, from the assembly level and the appearances applied at the different assembly levels.
Exactly.
So I think that organization and that import process is definitely impacting the workflow, but either for better or for worse. I mean, especially if you do a lot of SOLIDWORKS work, being able to have that visual assembly structure is helpful. But kind of as you're going through here, it's like, hey, everything that has that common appearance, let's change it, and you can do it in one location. So yeah, this is Eric's actually beating me to the punch of asking you some of these questions, and he's answering for us. We have a couple things that I think you're going to take it down right to your next steps here, Mike. So Dallas asks, can you, I think his question is coming from maybe a SOLIDWORKS background here where, we're familiar with these layers of appearances in SOLIDWORKS where you could have an appearance applied at the part level and then change that at the assembly level. Can you explain how that's different in Visualize? And then can you get into, what Mahir is asking is, what if you have, one part, but you want different appearances per face?
All right. Yeah, two good questions. So Dallas, on your first question, and for the SolidWorks users out there that don't know this, the um, SolidWorks has a hierarchy of how it prioritizes appearances. So you can take and apply an appearance to the part, and then the hierarchy above that is like the feature or the body, the feature, the face, I think is the hierarchy. I might be wrong on that.
Right.
And those can all have different hierarchies, and they all override each other. In fact, I don't have SolidWorks open, but if you right click on a part, go to the little appearance, the beach ball, it shows you that hierarchy, and one overrides the other ones. Visualize doesn't have that. We have just the appearance that's applied to it, and it's applied to the essentially that part that you've created inside of here, and that's what we attach it to. If I want to override it, I don't have to worry about the hierarchy. I can just slap on a new appearance and it'll go through. What we do offer in part of the Viz Pro, and one of the biggest things about going to the professional version, is you can create configurations. And this is what manages how those appearances inside of here. So for instance, I'm going to just start with a new configuration, and we'll come back to this. Give that configuration, not 21, but whatever. So now I've got my base configuration, which is what we've done up to this point. I can always come back to it. And as we start to maybe toggle in and change things, like I don't really love this this light gray, so let's grab it and let's modify this. Oh, I'm not have to do that quite yet. I gotta jump back. I want to show you one thing. This light gray, we want to do something else. So I'm going to grab something from the library. If you modify, try to make sure this isn't too confusing. If you modify the instance here, the configurations don't recognize that, because you need you have to have another created appearance for the configuration to pull from the library. So let's just do this red on here. It's that face. It's actually pretty cool. So the base configuration, now you'll notice that gray is still there. It's because I modified the appearance that is used in that configuration. So you just have to have a new, either copy and paste it and tweak it or pull from the library. But then we can start to stack up these configurations to have really cool for like design meetings, design reviews. If you have a lot of different finishes you want to use, you can use Visualize to create a bunch of configurations. And then there's this presentation mode. Control M is the hotkey, and we'll give us a sec to load. It goes to full screen. We can pull this up, and then we can take and toggle through the configurations to see, which ones we like the most. So Control M, or the presentation mode, super handy for, if you want to really show off to that's CEO, whoever it might be.
Yeah, it really simplifies the user interface there. Like you could have this on a touchscreen or some sort of big presentation mode to just quickly go through, simplify the display. I mean, yeah, especially with having powerful hardware, really makes it look good. We had another question come in terms of kind of the responsiveness and how, as you're applying these changes, it's re-rendering. And I think we talked a little bit earlier about those rendering modes as we're making some of these changes to the model. So I think, Ahmed, maybe take a look back at earlier when we were changing some of the rendering styles as we're going through there, and kind of how fast it's updating there in front of our eyes. So maybe go into what fast or preview really makes it fast and snappy as you're doing some of these changes, even with the geometry things you were doing earlier, Mike.
Yeah, like, modifying geometry, doing animations with a lot of moving parts. You don't need to be working in a rendering mode. Just go to this rasterize. This is going to be your best performance, because we're not actually doing any of that ray tracing. This is just like, how SolidWorks CAD handles it in terms of what we see. When you start to apply appearances, and we're getting a little bit further down the line of getting ready to actually render, I start to migrate up in terms of slower performance, because we have more calculations. But you go from that fast to accurate. You may, depending on what materials you're using and the lighting that you're using, you may never need accurate. I've got a lot of, like, the Shredder is a great example where fast, let's take a look. Looks good. I like it. Let's compare that to accurate. There's not a lot of complexity in this model that the accurate rendering engine needs to be enabled. So I would probably just use fast. It is faster. Always if you feel like it's still not utilizing your graphics card and you paid money for it, do things like make sure you've got a certified driver. You can also come into the 3D viewport. Make sure you've got like the CPU, you've got your GPUs are enabled. You'll see here my Quadro's on. Make sure those are checked. You can offload CPU. You can also change like the resolution down. This is sorry, on the user interface. You may want to change that down. Oh no, that was the right spot. 3D viewport. Because right now I've got pretty big monitor and I'm rendering this. You can go smaller, maybe down to like 1280. This will help too if you feel like your performance is bad. We'll let that change. So those things can help, but yeah, graphics, your drivers, probably the key thing. If you feel it's bad, then just make sure you're actually using your GPU in the system settings.
Yeah, maybe we can dive in here to that handlebar up there, Mike. I'm noticing like some of the flat plastic colors because we're getting some more questions on having more control over applying different appearances to different regions of the model or different faces, that sort of thing. Because maybe you can explain what's going on here with these parts because of either how they're coming from CAD or are they one body? Do they have one appearance? How can we break that up?
Yeah, there's a lot of imported geometry in this model, just step files because, right, purchase components, they're not going to remodel it, get it from the vendor. And I think we all know that story. And this is a great example. So they have the actual shut off and the start button on here. Sorry, it gets a little funky to navigate at this level. There's some fasteners that have actually been scanned inside of here. And just to show you how it's grouped, let's just bring in an appearance. We'll drag and drop that right onto here. So this has been brought in as one big body, which isn't ideal because I really wanted to show the highlight of like the stop button, the emergency stop in red, but I can't do that. Like I can't apply it to this, and nor do I want to go back and remodel that and spend time. So another favorite tool of mine, so we talked about like the break edges, the hotkey shift left, shift right to copy paste. But I use this all the time. When you're in part selection mode, which is this guy here, the blue one, you can right click and it doesn't matter where you right click. This is just to enable the tool, edit. And once this comes up, you'll see there's a split part, very bottom right here. This tool here lets me actually start to take and grab the mesh facets that have been imported and converted and then break those apart from each other. So a lot of users who want more control, I want to paint this face, but I don't have that grouped. This is the magic sauce right there. So the way it works is that workflow of right click on a geometry, go to part splitting. You'll also see it over here on that advanced tab where that corner radius is. It's in a couple spots. That's how I get to it. Then brings up the dialog. So now I can say, all right, let's click on this face. And you'll see how it now is breaking up all of those facets that are inside that have been imported. That looks good. And that's based on this facet angle. So if we go to like 0 degrees, it's just going to grab that single triangle. If we go to 1 degree, we'll probably expand a little bit to the next one. The default is 20. 20 does a good job, especially if you got some edges in here, but you can play with that. I like it. Execute split. We're going to do that one. And then we'll go through and basically just start to break off this imported body into stuff that I want to add some detail to. This fastener, let's go to like 40 degrees. We probably have a little more of an edge there. 60 degrees. Just trying to get as much. You don't have to be super exact with these, but once you get it kind of dialed, you'll see. This one has a 90-degree edge to it, so I'm guessing that split face or that won't recognize it. Make sure I got that execute. And you'll see what I'm getting to, because now what I'm doing is I'm starting to break these up into their own. I'm also I don't need to be in that rendering mode. There we go. Yeah, so see here we have, doesn't quite get it. I know that this one doesn't have a round edge, no big deal. Let's go to 91, 95 or something. And what you can do is if you're having trouble like I am here, you can also take and split up individual faces and then regroup those together. So essentially, I'll do it because it's easier to just show you the whole point of live design, right? All right, so let's do 90 on that face. I'm going to execute the split. Let's execute the split there. And then let's execute the split inside. And we'll close this. All right, so that's enough to kind of demonstrate. Now you'll see that I click on this stuff. These are all their own parts. And what I can do is use Control Select, grab those parts in that case, and we can say merge. So even though I broke them up more than I wanted to, you can now start to stitch things back together. These ones came in pretty nice. You'll see there's some facets that are missed. I wouldn't worry too much about it unless it comes through and it's noticeable, as you apply the appearance, but you can start to merge those back in. So then the expected, grab a red and we'll do it from our paint. Our expected behavior, we'll bring in that red to it, and you'll notice that it's actually trying to figure out what I wanted to. I've broken that surface up. There's still an underlying surface to it. Okay, so you do it. That doesn't look great. No big deal. They go back. I gotta make sure we're getting it to the right surface. So the software has got, they call it Z buffering, where it's trying to figure out the direction that we're looking at it. And right now we have two sets of surface tessellated geometry that's sitting on top of each other, and it's very confusing. So don't worry too much about if you see it. We're going to apply red there. I'm a huge fan of like this dark chrome. We'll bring the dark chrome in there, and you'll see you got a little bit of a bleed. What you can do if you get that is, one, you could just like slightly scale the part, or what I do is we'll just move it a hair. So on top here, what I'm doing, grabbing the translation tools. I don't need to do it absolute. That's just going to do it relative to the part. I will just pull that button up. That's a little too much. Another great example of you don't need rendering to do this. Live rendering on. Get much better performance there. Looks good. And then let's do some chrome. Shift, paint, paste. Let's grab this one. We'll do it there. And pretty quick, you've got what was one big, part. We can start to break those up into their own subcomponents.
No, we're even getting comments on this. So many great tips, says Andy. This is really good stuff, Mike. So also, I see a couple other fasteners there that you could work on, or you want to point something out? Yeah,
like you notice, so I broke this thing apart in a couple faces. I just stitched it back together, and that corner radius tool still works. So even though it was really sharp, I could have done that before, and it probably gotten a lot easier. Actually, let's just try it. So here, the whole thing, let's just give it a 0.5. All right, cool. That looks good. Edit. A little lag here. I'm not too worried about it. Split the part. We're going to do it for that bottom fastener. So while I go through and do this, we grab it all. So I added that little bit of an edge radius to it. It's recognizing pretty much the whole thing. We'll execute the split, close it out, and then I can copy and paste that fastener. So while we're talking about this, one thing I do want to point out, if you're using the monitor file option, so that update, and you're using this in your workflow, you've now created essentially a new variation of this part. I've created a bunch of subparts. Visualize isn't going to know that. It's not going to understand. It doesn't see that workflow trail. So when you run the update, so maybe Michael, maybe you say, hey, we got a different vendor. We're switching to a different on-off ignition switch we got to swap it out. And then you did that in the CAD model.
Yep.
This becomes its own entity. I'll still get the new geometry, but I'll have the old one in here. So there'll be a little rework. It's not smart enough to say that we understand I did all this part splitting. So just be aware of that.
That's great. I think there was a Mahir had another tip. If you're doing some more of this preparation in SolidWorks, what do you think of this, Mike? So you can apply random appearances in SolidWorks to split faces, and then apply the desired appearance in Visualize.
Mm-hmm. A great tip. So the point of that is, like, if you have a little bit more of a complicated strategy, like here's a great example. So Shredder, in the final rendering, I played a lot with changing these front panels to a different color. I could do that here with that same workflow, right? Edit, we could split the part, reapply it there, or in SolidWorks, since there's a little bit more control of that hierarchy of, feature, part, face, and so on, I could paint this face in SolidWorks bright pink. When it imports to Visualize sees that as a new, completely new instance of a part. Even though it's not, even though in SolidWorks we've created the shroud is one part, comes from one mold, you can trick it. So I do that a lot too. But you got to kind of understand what your goals are in Visualize and how much work you want to do in CAD. You can get a lot of work done there. Today, I really wanted to show, like, if that's not the case, if our rendering folk don't have access to CAD, you can still do this like split part workflow to it.
That's great. Yeah, maybe if there's a couple other changes we want to make, and then we had some questions earlier on, adjusting light sources, and maybe we could talk about some of the HDR lighting and other things that we can do to just make the product pop out a little bit more.
Yeah, great. Let's we could spend time. I think the biggest takeaway that I want you guys all to get when you go into renderings is the more time you spend up front looking for the little details. The start button's got to be red. What decals can you introduce? Decals are simple to apply in appearances. What's really sharp edge? That to me is the easiest but fastest way to start bringing realism to it. Our appearances apply to everything. Another thing you can do is, as you're happy with an appearance, you say, this is as good as it's going to get. You can right click and just hide show and just start hiding out components. That way we know, I didn't get that one. That way we know for sure this one's done. And then when nothing is here anymore, when we've got all my appearances, see, like example, I didn't get these inner wheels. You'll, especially with larger assemblies, you'll start to know where you missed it. Right click, you can all bring it back with the hide show, it just shows everything, or Control Shift U. And then all of a sudden this model comes in and it just looks great. So spend time there, and then you can come in and start working on your lighting and your scenes. So let's jump over to that. So on the Shredder one, I did use an HDRI. So that's basically an HDRI is where we've captured a scene in a sphere, and we've also captured the light sources inside of there. The libraries inside of SolidWorks have HDRIs that come with the install. There's like HDR Haven, HDRIHaven.com. You can Google search it. There's a lot of free options out there. 8K is probably where I would start downloading. 16K, you need definitely a bigger graphics card to handle them. But like the 2K ones in here, this salt flat was perfect for the Shredder. So right out of the install, drag and drop, and then it didn't work.
I know, it's happened so many times. You apply the scene, it's like, where's the scene?
It looks the same. So make sure there's a hierarchy here. The HDR scene, that spherical, surrounding in the background. And then if there's a backplate or a 2D image, because these are a lot easier to get super high res, super crisp, that's going to override that. I had one enabled, the soft gray. I'm just going to turn it off. There's your scene, right? That looks pretty good. What I need to do though to really make this pop is we're going to flatten the floor, and that just brings that right up to the bottom there.
Well, it almost looks like, real quick, Mike, it almost looks like the Shredder's floating.
Is it? Oh yeah, it is. Good eye. All right, we can fix that. That's actually, I'll show you. I got a good trick for that. All right, so as I mentioned, if you're moving geometry, creating animations, no point to really be rendering it. Yeah, it is floating. Nice, Mr. Steves. So let's go in and we'll bring it down. If you guys are doing cars or, in this case, anything that's like got some pressure to it on a softer material like a tread, grabbing the whole model, I'm going to click on it, I always like to punch it through the ground just a little bit. And that
actually, it's in the sand now.
Yep. And same thing with a car. A car, even at, correct air pressure, you're going to have a little bit of a flatness to the wheel. You can have a round wheel. Just bring it just subfloor, and it gives that illusion that it's actually got some pressure on it. Super easy to do. Brings a lot more realism to your model. All right, so we got this in here. I think the scene looked really good. I was happy with it, but what it was missing was the light that was baked into the scene didn't quite have like that. They call it the golden hour, where you get that really orange appeal from the sun. So all I did is kind of went into the position of where the sun source is going to be. In the scenes tab, where we're doing things like you can tweak this. We were looking at like the tiling of the salt flat was a little large, so changing like the height, maybe tweak that height to 1 or so. But what I want to do is add a new light. And I'm going to take and use the match current camera. It's what I use almost all the time because I know where I want the light source to be. It's like you're setting it up in the studio, hey, I want it right here. Boom. Mm-hmm. Same thing. Set it there. And then as I move around, move away from that, you can see that light source. And given there is actually a light source here, but it doesn't have the color I want. And I want to be able to have a little more control of it. So for those not familiar with light sources, they're a little funky to work with if you're new. Clicking on the light source lets me move it, and then clicking here lets me move where it's aimed at. So you have 2 controls over the light source in terms of how you want to do it. And if you lose it like I just did, no big deal, click it. And I'm just working with the transform, the manipulator on. All right, so we've got this big panel light. And what we want to do is just give that realism. You can do it a couple of ways. There's a color temperature. If you're not familiar with this, Google color temperature, but like a standard household warm lights, like 34 or 4,000 Kelvin-ish. Like xenon lights you see on like German cars and I guess most cars now, new cars these days. That's usually in the 6,000 to close to 7,000 K. So like orangish to red to blue, and there's a pure white kind of in between. The other way you can do it, I love, is you can also create just like a little filter, like you're putting what they call a gel over the light source.
Yep, right.
So I'm going to gel this thing. That's what you would say. That's the actual lingo. Throw on a gel. I'm going to gel it. I was thinking of like, oh man, I'm gelling with the insoles, right? Is that what it is?
Yep. Oh man,
you
totally forgot about those gelling days.
So this is taking a minute to process because we're applying. We've got that color temperature. We're putting a big gel, and then from here it's just cranking up. That light source wattage. No real rhyme or reason to this value. It is relative to the size of the panel too. So you just got to kind of play with it. And ooh, that's a little much, but it looks like it's looking at a sunset. And we got the nice shadow is coming across, which it does. Yep. It didn't have that emphasized shadow. So maybe we'll cut that down. Now there are third-party tools you can use. HDRI Studios is one. I'll plug those guys because it's really great. That are designed for you to go through and take an HDRI scene and build your own custom lighting inside of there that you can control. We work very well with those, but you can do it a lot. You can do a lot of that inside of Visualize where you don't need it. So here we've got.
I'm going to bring up Brian's question here as you're getting ready to render this out. Like in terms of like global image adjustments or histograms, kind of, it made me think of scenes and some of this lighting. But in terms of like maybe globally for either the camera, like what controls do we have there? And if we do have some of those graphics artists that are used to having some of those histograms and things, where can we go from here?
They've introduced post-processing, post-processing tools to Visualize. You've got the options. This is a part of a camera filter. So like if you use Instagram, you got like filters you can apply. You can create those. You can export them. You can save them. Oh, I really like this filter, like you can in Lightroom and in Photoshop and so on. They're a little limited, but I think it's a great start in getting you through the majority. So things like, this seems a little underexposed to me. So I'm going to just add a little bit of a post-processing filter. I'm not even in the camera that I really like, but that's fine. That might be a little too much. So tweak the exposure. Saturation's another big one. I always like to give it a little bit of saturation. This is just kind of that warmer, fuzzier. It makes colors pop a little bit more. So we'll bring that in here as well. That light source is pretty bright. That looks good. So you do get this, but in terms of like a histogram, that's still going to be more into that, intermediate expert level rendering. I personally always go to Photoshop after I work in here to get access to look at your RGB levels and exposures, do some post-processing. You don't need to, though. You can get away with a lot of it here. Actually, while I'm here, I'll turn on bloom too, because anytime you introduce your own light source, and I always recommend enabling bloom. So that just gives that little bit of that like look, right? And pretty quick, I didn't get into the shrouds, which is a big part of that material. That's just the import of it. But we're getting pretty close. I think that's, render.
Yeah, so it's definitely something to check out. Yeah, you're getting it right into output tools. So make sure, everybody, that you head over to shredder.solidworks.com to see some of these awesome renders, because there's some really cool options. I think you're going to get into this real quick as we start to wrap up here. Of what settings did you do in the output to really enable the website team to use these images to their maximum potential?
Yeah, great question. And we discovered this a couple of years ago, and I've been using it ever since. It was kind of overhauled this year, these render passes, to a little bit different, but you'll see like this alpha layer. Beauty is like color and everything we want. The alpha layer I love. And this actually will render out where we want no background, the transparency. So for the web team and the one that's actually on the website, what I did is I come through, render it out. Typically PNG or TIFF files, both uncompressed versions. Don't use JPEG. I don't know why JPEG got so popular. I still think that was some sort of scam back in like the 80s. Everyone used JPEG. Don't use JPEG. PNG and TIFF. PSD, for some reason, if you are going to Photoshop, doesn't inherently capture alpha layers. In fact, you'll see this thing turns off, so you have to render that out. This will make more sense in a second. So use PNG. If you want to have one without that no background at all, you can do it just by including this. It's fully transparent. What I do is render the two out, and then I actually rendered one out of just the scene. So just hide the model. You can do it, just select on it and change visibility. Crank it out. In terms of like the render passes, this is a big question I get a lot. What I do is just let it sit. At 39 passes, does it look good? At 2,000 passes, does it look good? Start to use this as your baseline, and start small. So with denoiser on, which is this option, 100 passes, I might get a really good image, and I'll just kind of crisp it up a little bit in post-processing if need be, or be really happy with it. If you have hardware, then you can throw at it. Like I do have access to some big stuff. I'll render 4K resolution. I always go big. You can never make it bigger. You can always make it smaller. So you're handing off to a web team or a graphics team. For like non-print, if you're not planning to print a poster, resolution 96. In fact, 72 I think is like what Instagram uses. Any mobile device, 96 is pretty much the standard. So your 4K 96, and then start your render. So I'll jump over. We really don't want to. I'm not here to talk. Oops, wrong one. Talk too much about the post-processing side, but we'll mention it quick because I think this is really cool to show those advanced layers. And sorry guys, we're going a little long here, but
yeah, as that's opening up, there was another question on some of the export and publishing capabilities here of being able to do. Can we do GLB for like 3D view and PowerPoints? Mihira asks.
Yes. So there's an export option too. So everything in here is going to be your static, or your 2D output. The little iris is flat images, animations. Obviously, if you have a timeline, we'll render those out. Turntables, we'll spin it around. And then there's also the interactive content, which is part of the little iris. You just got to change the output mode. to panoramic interactive. And this creates a stack of images and a JavaScript to manipulate it.
Awesome.
Now, when you get into the GLTF and GTB exports, this is part of this export package. So like if you're embedding into websites, there's some JavaScripts that run these natively, and you can actually all of these appearances and decals that you applied here, you can compress those into these formats, and they'll support that. The Draco was new this year. This is the new compression algorithm. It's a lot more responsive for website. So check that out if you're looking for it. And then OBJ, this is a super cool if you want to go to like another third party for like a VR experience or something. That's pretty standard.
Oh, that's great.
So what's so nice then is that I created this. Did I just close Photoshop too? No, I didn't. It's right here. I created that rendering. I brought it into Photoshop. I played with the colors a little bit just to get it to pop a little bit more. Obviously here's all the final shrouds, but then if you're not familiar with Photoshop, we use layers inside of here. And over on the lower right-hand side, oh, that's zoomed way there. I can't zoom in here. You'll see this black and white little thumbnail. That's actually just a mask that I've rendered out of Visualize. So Visualize created that for me. I've created a layer. I created another rendering of just the background. And now the web team, this is what they wanted. Like, I want to be able to move this thing around and actually put it in place so some of the graphics can line up. So that gives you that additional option to be able to create this alpha layer, render a separate image in the background, and then I can start to tweak it as need be. You don't need to go into Photoshop at all. We have the post-processing tools. I typically do it just to get that final color correction. But I do a lot of photography, so I get super super cranky with that stuff.
Well, yeah, and that's a couple great tips there. I mean, if depending on your role in your organization, if you're just on the CAD side, or if you're intermediates doing CAD and some of the rendering, or if you're creating content that someone else in the company, maybe if they're focused on more of the graphical arts or marketing type, they could even use SolidWorks Visualize and leverage that engineering CAD data and create some of this with them, with some of the Visualize licenses that's included with SolidWorks. So this has been really cool, Mike. Thanks for taking us through your workflow of from SolidWorks through SolidWorks Visualize to create that hero image of the shredder. This is amazing. We did not have time to get into animations today, unfortunately. Yeah. So if you want to see that, put it in the chat, put it in the comments of the video. Maybe on a future episode of Live Design, we'll get into
I'd love to do
animation capabilities. So any other last minute tips here that we want to share before we sign off, Mike?
I think, the biggest one is like spend a little extra time looking for the little things, playing with materials, refine them, add a little texture here and there. Nothing in the real world is perfect, and your eye and brain understand that. So you need to put in some flaws to your renderings in order for that really lifelike rendering to come through, and have fun with it. It's such a fun tool. It's such a fun. I can spend hours in this thing every day, and I do. And detail, find it, elevate it, and just enjoy your time with Visualize.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. Okay, so with SolidWorks Live Design, what's coming up? In a couple of weeks, we have Jan Kili coming on, talking about 2D drawings with draft sites. It's going to be hammer time. This is going to be the theme on how he can create some 2D drawings. He has a hammer that broke. We were going to fix it, creating a new drawing to get it made. Between then, next week, we actually have another great session on exploring 3D Experience Works Live, getting into some more simulation. So I know that's close to my heart. If you take a look at some of the previous episodes of the Live Design season, you'll see where I've been able to, even with the shredder, get in and show you some cool tips, tricks, and workflows on how we can validate your products and improve their performance virtually before we ever make a prototype. So some great workflows, with that, of course, with SolidWorks in those previous episodes, and more episodes to come. So with that, we'll sign off for today. I'll look forward to the next week and the following weeks for our next upcoming sessions. Always have a great day.